All right, everybody. So there's been an article posted on Channel Fireball by Kieran McKen. I can't say that last name. It must be a New Zealand name. As you know, I've kind of in my skirmish events or in playing, just kind of raised some concerns for myself, and I had a viewer reach out to me with concerns about the state of the draw in Flesh and Blood, and this was an article that was posted that's just about that. And I reached out to LSS a couple, maybe a week ago, and kind of raised some questions and just wanted some explanation. And they told me that there would be some information coming out, and then we had the update on March 1st, and then this article was also posted on February 26th. So maybe this is some of what they're saying. So what I thought I kind of breezed through the article. And then I decided it'd be fun to go through the article together, and for me to hopefully learn and to see why LSS has adopted a different system than I'm used to in Magic the Gathering. But I also thought it would be fun to see if I could go through this article in 30 minutes, because that's the Blitz timer, right? To see if I could make it through the article in 30 minutes and understand why draws are the way that they are in Flesh and Blood in 30 minutes without drawing. So I just thought it'd be funny. I don't know. I'm trying to make it more lighthearted and fun. I do also want to say one big, important point here. I know where this is going to go, and where this is going to go is that LSS very, very, very much values high-level competitive play. And I know that where this is going to go is to say that I personally, and people who are going to draws a lot, just need to get better at the game. And yeah, I mean, 100% agree. I don't know what to tell you. I agree. I need to get better at the game. I agree that that's an answer, and that we need to get better at the game. I also struggle because I want to compete in tournaments, and I want that fun experience of playing in a skirmish. I don't want to play in high level tournaments. I don't want to play at the calling. That's not something I would want to do, because I'm not that level. I'm not a competitive. I don't care about the XP and the ELO or whatever that is. And so I feel like there's not a middle ground. And I wish there was a better middle ground. I feel like that's where I'm going to land on this. But before we land on where I'm going to land, let's hop into it. Because let me say one other thing. I understand why they have it the way that it is in the high level competitive tournaments. It makes total sense to me. But for fun, like hanging out in a skirmish or hanging out in your armory event, where it's lower level tournaments, it seems it seems like a hill that I don't want to die on. Anyway, we'll get into it. So we're going to start our 30-minute timer. We're going to see if I can make it through this article. We're going to read it together. Drawing Dead, the Status of Draws in Flesh and Blood by Kieran on February 26th. All right, so what does a draw represent to you in Flesh and Blood? On the face of it, the answer is pretty simple. If time, and in some cases 3 extra turns, runs out, and so they've just changed that, right, to 1 extra turn. It's like you finish the turn and then it's the next turn. Runs out and the game is not finished. The result is a draw. Okay? The real point of contention in the community over draws is whether and to what extent a draw should be considered more valuable than a loss. I believe it's important to note that the outset of draws are extremely and increasingly rare in high-level Flesh and Blood tournament play. And so this is the point. In high-level Flesh and Blood tournament play, this is not happening, which is great. That's phenomenal. As players become more experienced and play more games, I fully expect draws to become an extreme outlier in terms of game results in the future. That's awesome. 100%. I'm excited to see that. I hope that happens. To give an example, at the calling in Auckland, there were 157 players and 10 rounds of Swiss. Even accounting for players dropping, there were approximately 650 rounds of Fab played and no more than 5 draws. That's awesome. That's impressive in the entire tournament, or roughly 1 draw per 150 games. Yeah, that's not the situation that you are seeing if you are watching me play this game. It's just not. I mean, and in our tournament, in our Discord tournament, we saw server, we saw a lot of a couple draws, and there was not 150 games. So that is accurate for the calling Auckland, but it's not accurate for kind of where we're seeing in North America, the play in North America, because we aren't as experienced. And that's what he's saying here. I agree with that as people get, and I've seen this in my own life, as I get more experience in the game, I get quicker at it, and I get better at helping the other opponent if they aren't as experienced. So before examining the different positions, I'll give a brief overview of some relevant sections of the LSS tournament rules and policy. Skip this section if you already know this. Well, I don't, so here we go. I want to include it to provide a foundation for players who aren't quite sure how the system works. Okay, current LSS policy. So a draw. Draws and losses are both worth 0 points, so that's the biggest contention. The current policy is that draws are effectively counted as losses in terms of primary tiebreakers. While draws are sometimes relevant as secondary tiebreakers, this has very rarely come up in tournament play so far. At professional level tournaments, draws are treated differently than losses for the purposes of ELO calculations. The current policy is that when time is called at the end of the round, now it's changed to 1 additional turn. If no result has been reached at the end of this, the game is a draw. The trial policy used at the calling Auckland was that when the active player completes a turn, if no player, so they try. So this is what happened. So at the calling, they tried just finishing the active player's turn, and now they have changed it. So that originally was you finish the turn, you play 3 turns, and then it's over. At the calling, they tried when time's called, it's just the active player finishes their turn. And then now they've said the active player finishes their turn, and now there's 1 turn. That's updated since Kieran wrote this article. Okay, concessions. The current policy is that concessions at any time are allowed. The trial policy was in fact during the calling is aimed at preventing concessions from being used to avoid draws, because people were trying to avoid draws, I guess. This may be adopted into official tournament if LSS if it enhances tournament play. To summarize, a player can concede a game before presenting their deck without any consequence. So you just take the loss and the opponent takes the win. Conceding at any point after presenting your deck will result in being dropped from the tournament at the discretion of the head judge or TO. I think they changed this a little bit, but I don't think it's super relevant. Asking for a concession after both players have presented their decks will result in a match loss penalty for the next round. Okay, that's not super what we're worried about right now, but that's the current policy. All right, tiebreakers. The primary tiebreaker is fairly simple. When a player who has taken a loss and draws in the later rounds of a tournament will have better tiebreakers. What the primary tiebreaker looks like is which player most recently had the most points at the end of a round. Okay, so this is basically what they've done here is and I like this a lot. They've basically said it's not just your number of wins, losses, ties, whatever. It's really when you got those ties or losses that matter, because if you lost at the later rounds, it was against a better opponent, so that loss should count for more, is basically what that's set up. So if you win rounds 1, 2, and 3, and then you lose in round 4, that is weighted more heavily than somebody who won rounds 1, 2, and 4 but lost round 3. Does that make sense? So let's read what he said. Player A is 5-2 with losses in rounds 4 and 7. Player B is 5-1-1 with a draw in round 3 and a loss in round 7. Both players have 5 points at the end of round 3. Player A had 3 points at the end of round 3. Player B had 2 points at the end of round 3. Player A has better tiebreakers because his loss was different. His loss was later. So that's the key. The loss or the draw, because they're the same thing, is later. This illustrates why draws are not generally relevant to tiebreakers, but they aren't totally irrelevant. In the above scenario, if player V had drawn their game in round 4, the secondary tiebreakers would come into play. This looks like a player match loss percentage. Players A PML is 2 of 7. Players B is 1 of 7. Because of a double loss. So player B is 1 of 7. Therefore, player B would have the better tiebreaker results in that scenario. Okay. Why draws are not generally relevant in tiebreakers. In the above scenario, if player B had drawn in their round 4, player B, what did they do? Oh, drawn in round 4. Okay. Makes sense. Because they would have a better tiebreaker in that scenario. Okay. The community ideas. So anyway, people complained, and now these were the community ideas, and I was one of these people. So that's why I kind of wanted to do this video. The following are some views of the community that I've encountered both online and discussions with other players. It's worth noting a couple things before continuing. It's impossible to get a full picture of how prevalent some of these views are in the global player base and the level of support for each side. These discussions often take place across different platforms with varying levels of participation. The intent of this article is to address both sides in the arguments, give my own thoughts on the issues involved. And this is 100% accurate. And it is tough to see where everybody is. And on top of that, it's also tough to see why everybody is participating and what their expectations for participating is. And that's where I think we get into some dialogue, I hope, where it's like, we'll get into it. Okay. Draws should only be worth 1 point. So this is something people say. Draws should be worth 1 point. This is something that I said. Arguments for. In most games that utilize a Swiss point system, draws are worth more than a loss. For Magic, a win is worth 3 points and a draw is worth 1. And in chess, it's 1 and 0.5. Flesh and Blood is one of the few trading card games where you generally are not rewarded for drawing a game as opposed to losing it. So that was number 1. Number 2, drawing in game is objectively better than objectively a better result than losing. A closely fought game that results in a draw should not be counted the same as a blowout loss. Navigating a difficult game state for multiple turns to cling on and to survive is an example of player skill, and it should be recognized. And I agree with that. I think there's a good point here I think I raised this point too, where it's like, I have to work really hard and I get to play the game in order to kind of stay alive. And it's like, I get to kind of work hard to stay alive. And that requires skill and talent. All right, number 3, factors outside of your control, such as somebody playing slow, can lead to a draw and are particularly punishing without the consolation prize of getting 1 point for a game where you're clearly winning. So this is like so important. And I almost wish that this was number 1, because when I was complaining, my complaint wasn't for me. My complaint was for the opposing player, because I was playing slow because I didn't know how to play the game. The opponent got a tie and didn't get a point, and that felt bad for me and for the opponent. And this is where they're going to get into. I know he's going to talk about people playing faster, and we'll get into it. We'll get into it. All right, so that's what it is. Factors outside of your control, such as slow play, can lead. And then the last one, ultimately, it just defies logic that a player with a better record in Swiss should miss out on top 8 purely because draws are the same as losses. Okay. And that is an argument that I've definitely seen. And ultimately, though, this is the weakest argument, in my opinion, the top 8 thing, because I think that this plays into, if they're going to organize the structure like this, then you just have to adapt. But we'll see what he says. Okay. The philosophy of LSS has consistently been that games should be played to win and to discourage draws. And this is completely irrelevant, right? The game and tournament structure has clearly been designed with that philosophy in mind. The game was tested for many years before it was released with thousands of games. Yeah, we get it. They love the game. They played it. They've tested it. Different decks across multiple formats. I totally agree with this point. The only disagreement I have here is, yes, that LSS staff has play tested this for thousands of games, but LSS staff is not the average human being. They are not the average player. And that's where I get into this a little bit of like, yeah, I'm all for it. I'm all for you discouraging draws, but to say that it's been tested for many years, for 7 years, so everybody should, like, it's been tested for 7 years and we know that it works, isn't the same thing as saying, I know that it works for Louis, who's been playing for 6 months, and he's going to have a good experience in my event, and he wants to have a good experience in an event, and it's going to work for him. And this is where I'm going to get into at the end. I'm going to give my 2 cents, is like, I wish there was some sort of divide between high-level players and me. You know what I mean? Like the average Joe who's trying to hang out and learn the game and wants to play. We'll get into it more. But all right, presumably this data was analyzed and led to consensus that 50 minutes or 30 for blitz is enough time for the game to be completed when both players play at a reasonable pace. There may be some strategies, either now or in the future, like OTK Visceri, that are simply not viable based on these limits, but this is the case in a lot of games. This is totally true. I'm inclined to put my faith in LSS and consider this to be conscious design philosophy rather than the lack of understanding of the consequences of 0-point draws and the frequency at which they occur. And again, I totally agree. I totally believe in LSS. I totally believe that at the high level play, this is the absolute best way to do it. 100% agree. High level play, 100% agree, should be this way. My issue is not at the high level play zone. My issue is at the everyday Joes, the people who are playing this game at their local armory with 6 friends, and so we'll get into it more. I know I keep saying that, but I want to give the credit to the article before I give my opinions. It's not as simple as looking at Magic's treatment of draws, concluding it's strictly better than Flesh and Blood. Competitive Magic is played with a best of 3 format. If I had to guess, I would say most Magic draws occur when the match ends at 1-1. And okay, we keep coming back to the Magic thing, which is great, and I think we need that. But I don't think it needs to be like Magic. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm not trying to say that it needs to be like Magic. I don't want it to sound like that. In this situation, each player has actually won a game. So this argument is basically, I should read it right. So split result of 1 point each might be viewed as more reasonable. In Flesh and Blood, with a best of 1 format, it's more difficult to justify each player getting a point when no conclusive results have been reached. And this is a great point. So in Magic, when you're 1-1 and then the third game ends in a tie, you both won a game, so maybe you should both get a point. Whereas in Flesh and Blood, if neither of you actually won a battle, then why would you get a win? That makes a ton of logical sense to me, and I like that. I do. I like that. Maybe I don't think you should get a win. But I don't think you should be I don't think that if you are really battling, I don't feel like because of slow play of somebody else that you should be penalized. And he gets into it in a second. We'll get into it. We'll keep reading. It's also certainly not an absolute truth that drawing a game indicates a higher level of skill than losing in Flesh and Blood. Flesh and Blood requires skill to survive and a tough spot in order to identify a window to potentially come back and win. And this is totally true. The game is so set up to like, hey, I'm surviving, and boom, I'm going to attack you and win. That's how the game works. At the same time, blocking out an opponent's attacks with 4 cards a turn for 6 turns in a row until time expires is not exactly the epitome of skill. And this is a valid point. Like you're backed against the wall. You can just kind of throw all 4 cards and start over. I get that kind of argument. It doesn't require skill to stay alive for the end of turns. I totally agree. In most games that end in a draw, the player losing at the time, whether on life or tempo, would generally go on to lose the game if it was to be played out to its conclusion. I question whether it's fair to reward player with potentially tournament-defining tiebreaker point for simply not losing. In most games, yeah, okay. I question whether it's fair to reward a player with a potentially tournament time-defining tiebreaker for simply not losing. Yeah, I don't understand what he's saying here. In most games that end in a draw, the player losing at the time would generally go on to lose the game. That makes sense. I question to reward the player. I see what he's saying. So simply they would have lost the game, right? So they would have lost the game if it would have gone on for another 15 minutes. So why should they get a point for getting the draw? That makes total sense to me too. Looking at it from a different angle, in the absence of a regular slow play, why should a player in a winning position be rewarded for being unable to close out a game? And this is a huge point. This is the best point, I think, in the article. If you are unable to finish your game in the amount of time and everybody's playing the right speed, then you shouldn't get the point. And I agree. But in my opinion, the problem's not coming as a result of that. Again, I think we are focusing too much on the tournament high-level play. The tournament high-level play doesn't have any issues. If only what is it, 5 games of 500, 1% of the games ended in a draw, then there's no issue at the tournament level. At the top level of Flesh and Blood, there's no issue. It's perfect. It works amazing. It's so good. The problem is that we are not. You, the viewer here, like, we are not at the top level of Flesh and Blood tournament. We don't know what we're doing. I don't know what the cards are, and I look at the cards every single day. I literally make videos on this game every single day, twice a day, And I still don't understand how the cards work together. And maybe I'm just an idiot. Maybe I'm just dumb. But I need to learn. I haven't played against most of the decks. You know what I mean? Like so it's not about the high level play for me. I think high level play is perfect. I think we need another entry point for the low level play. Fab is a game where the best players are able to play upwards, play towards particular game states and break points to win games. The lack of points awarded for a draw is a reflection of, yeah, I totally agree. So at the high level play, I totally get that. Okay, so now he gets into the slow play. I acknowledge this is a bit of a gray area when it comes to enforcement. While you're entitled to call a judge if you feel like your opponent is playing slowly, this can be difficult to enforce at a large tournament with a small number of judges. Yep, and so then he encourages players to try to get comfortable with kind of asking your opponent to speed up, then calling the judge as soon as possible if slow play is continuing. Maybe I think he even says like starting the game and saying, hey, if to your opponent, hey, if I'm playing too slow, please let me know and I'll try to speed up, and I'll do the same to you, which I think is a really great a really great point. Here's the thing. I don't know that telling the player in my case to hurry up is a solution, because I'm not trying to play slow I'm not trying to play slow on purpose. I'm trying to learn how to play. And right now there's no way. There's a couple ways, I guess. For me, I guess I just shouldn't be in the skirmish events. Like I guess I should just try to find a different event to play with people in a Discord server by myself or whatever. Because I'm not this person. If you told me to hurry up and play, that would make me play slower, because I would get more nervous, I think, that I'm not doing something right, and I would feel more guilty about it. So at a high level tournament, I totally agree that this is the best thing to do. If somebody is playing slow, like your goal here should be to win the tournament. But for some of these events that we're playing in armory events, should that really be our goal? Like should our goal be to win the tournament, or should our goal be to help create a community and help people learn how to play, and to help and maybe the answer to that is no. No, Lou, you're an idiot. That the point of a tournament is to play a tournament. That's not why I want to play. Like I want to play to enjoy the game. And I want to play to learn the game and to get better at the game. And so maybe one day I can play at a high level tournament and not have to, be rushed. So I really feel like the better, I don't know. I feel like we're talking about two different things is the point. The idea of a better Swiss record missing out on the top 8 stems from applying Magic style scoring system to Fab. First, as discussed above, it isn't easy to objectively describe any given draw is better than a loss in this game. Secondly, the tiebreaker system seeks to provide an objective metric which a player had more difficult path to achieve. And this is where we're talking about, like if you got your draws in earlier, then it is going to be better for you because the games didn't matter as much. So player A has the better record and deserves to make the top 8 over player B. Sorry, let's see, player A went 5, 1, and 2, right? So they should have be able to do over the player B who went 5 and 2. But player B lost these last 2 games, which were more difficult. So why would they get negative results because these games were easier because they were against lower level opponents, hypothetically, because as you stack you get higher. So player B should so player B should get in because his losses or draws were later in the tournament against higher level players. So I agree with that. I think that is a valid system, and I think that's the way that it should be. I don't have any issue with that personally. I don't. I know other people do. I don't have any issue with this. My issue is the person who loses who goes to a draw as a result of somebody who is learning how to play the game. I will get into it. All right. Player. So we already talked about this. Weaker opponents. Okay. In-game tie breaks. In-game tiebreakers should be introduced to reduce the chance of draws. The argument is that if draws are going to be treated as a loss, there should be some form of in-game tiebreaker to ensure a win-loss result in every round. The most common suggestion is that when time is called, the player with the highest life total, yeah, that's horrible. Player with the highest life total is only going to generate people playing all the Sigils of Solaces and stalling out the game and getting all the wins because they, played 15 Sigil of Solaces. Sorry. 9 Sigil Solaces or 6 Sigil Solaces. It's difficult to think of another possible tiebreaker outside of something like cards remaining in the deck. I strongly believe that this proposed solution would be a negative change for a number of reasons. Allowing someone to win a game based on highest life total risks fundamentally changing how the game is played and opens the door to time manipulation. I totally agree with Kieran here. A player ahead on life but losing the game could look over the round timer towards the end of the round and slow down their decisions and adjust their strategy to a point where they're fairly confident the game will not end on time. Yeah, so this is like the whole life thing just isn't going to work. I totally agree with that. Under the current system, the strategy is effectively pointless as the treatment of draws highly encourages players to do their best and find the path to victory. With life tiebreakers, the path to victory could often become finding a way to stall out the game while preserving an otherwise meaningless life total. Totally 100% agree. So we don't even need to get this. So the point here is that it's not a good outcome if somebody is just gaining life in order to win the game when it goes to the end of time because they have the most life. And that's not a fun game. That's not the heart of the game. I totally agree that shouldn't be the way it is. So the other idea was, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, the more deserving player, I can see the intent behind the life. Yeah, okay. He's just explaining that. So the other idea is chess clocks. People have brought this up. Magic Arena Online does that, whatever. Chess does that. When it's on your turn, when you have priority, you have a timer, and the timer is clicking. Each player gets 15 minutes, and if you run out of time, you lose the round. The key issue with this is Flesh and Blood is not a game like chess, he says, where a turn unless passing time priority is a single move, right? This idea, he says it could theoretically work in Magic Arena where the time is automatically done. And he gives this example, and the point of the example, you don't have to read it all, is that there's a lot of different priority passing in Flesh and Blood. And so in this small example that he takes, you would have to tap the clock 6 times, and this is like a really basic thing. So you'd just be hitting the clock too much. It would be really distracting. It would be really hard to to maintain and to track. It's just not a good solution. And in phases doesn't work, right? Like it just doesn't work. So that doesn't work. So then he gets into the double loss. One concept that's also been offered is that concessions should be allowed if a draw is effectively a double loss. So this argument is based around the assumption that the concession rules trialed in the Calling Auckland will be adopted into the official tournament rules and policy. If this doesn't happen, then the whole debate is irrelevant. The most common argument, so this is basically, so if you know that you're going to lose, if you know that it's going to go to time, then you should take the, you should forfeit the game, creating a way for you to not get the double loss. And players who want to do the right thing, there's certainly strong feelings about this policy in New Zealand when it first announced. If I'm clearly about to lose a game and I feel that my opponent deserves a win, this is where I feel. This is exactly how I felt. If I'm clearly about to lose a game and I feel like my opponent deserves a win, why shouldn't I be allowed to concede? A draw in the early stages of a large tournament can leave you in a spot where every round becomes a must-win due to the nature of tiebreakers. This can be particularly tough win-and-in situations where the draw would result in both players being eliminated from top 8 contention. There are without a doubt situations where this policy can lead to a result that neither player is happy with. The main problem with allowing flexibility surrounding concessions is that it's very easy to create exploitable loopholes, right? I get it. The optimal strategy is to simply never concede, no matter how badly you are losing. This is completely fine if everyone takes this approach, but in reality, it's not going to play out this way. Voluntary concessions create opportunities for players to feel intimidated. So this is basically him saying another player could try to intimidate somebody into conceding rather than playing it out, and it could become this thing where that other player won't be able to learn how to play or won't even take the chance of winning because they're intimidated by the other player. I agree with this. A newcomer playing against a high-profile player in the community might be in a position where they'd rather concede than risk facing a potential backlash for not doing the right thing. While it's often clear who's going to win the game when time is called, it's not always the case. New or just naturally introverted players may be talked into conceding the game on the basis of you are going to lose anyway, you're already locked for top 8, or you can't make top 8 in positions where it's not necessarily true. And then again, that person hasn't really actually won the round, so like they haven't actually done it to win. Outside of these examples, situations also tend to arise where neither player wants to concede but knows that it will result in a double elimination. This can lead to extended discussions about the deck's chances in the metagame. So this is where they're getting into like, top 8 matchups, coded talk about prize splits. It's just a lot of the super, super high level stuff that honestly I don't understand. So clear rules that disallow in-game concessions removes these gray areas while helping to ensure the most fair skill-based outcome of a FAB tournament. So I get this. I get it. Let's get to his conclusion. Hold on. We'll get to his conclusion. There's no perfect solution for the treatment of draws and TCGs. Ultimately, this can come down to a question of a personal preference and depend on the objectives of the creators and developers wish to accomplish. We'll talk about that. LSS has been clear from the beginning that their stance is that awarding points for draws detracts from... Oops, what did I do? Oopsies. We went to something else in Channel Fireball. Oh, all this way? We can't go back now. Oh, what a disaster. Should we pause the timer? We were pretty close. What happened here? I went to the top or bottom. This is what happens when I use a PC and not a Mac. Okay. It can lead to bad sportsmanship as well as anti-competitive behavior by incentivizing players to ID the final rounds of a Swiss to safely lock in a top 8 slot. I believe that the current tournament rules and policy involving the trial policy concerning concessions are consistent with these views and result in an overall better tournament experience for the vast majority of players. And then he puts out a really, really great personal note telling that his intentions about this article are not to look down on those in the community who have brought up concerns, nor just to portray himself as a perfect role model regarding the issues. A number of these concerns raised are basically, he says, are the same ones that were raised in New Zealand when they were first starting all these policies. While he ultimately disagrees with all the things that have been raised online, he acknowledges that they're coming from people who want to see the game succeed, like myself. Have on 2 separate occasions at semi-competitive, he says he's at 2 times he's been in semi-competitive events, he's become a bit frustrated with opponents who insisted on a draw, when in my opinion at the time I believe I was very close to winning. With the benefit of hindsight experience, he looks back with some regrets. Sorry. That was a lot of reading for 30 minutes. Well, honestly, I've never asked for concession. I've had 2 games go to time over the course. Okay, we need to get out of this. This is his points are really good here. He kind of shares his own opinions of when he was in there. It's important to take some responsibility when this occurs and look at what you could have done as a player to play better. So essentially he's saying his opponent ultimately conceded when it was allowed, and we need to all learn and be better players. I totally agree with him. I've been on the receiving end of a couple slow play warnings in my time. Kieran, you need to make a play is a bit of a classic meme against the New Zealand players, and I made a conscious effort to improve my pace of play in response to this. While I still have the room to improve further, I am now extremely confident that I can finish a game in any given format in the allotted time. I guess the wider point here is that if you focus on the things you can control in FAB, often the problems you're running into will sort themselves out. Okay. Oh, we did that like almost exactly. Is my timer going off? I can't hear it. It's in your ears probably. We did that. Like, where is the timer? It's on my computer somewhere. I want to talk about my opinions on this, okay? Because I think everything he said. Is that done now? Good. We finished that article, and we did it. We played a Blitz event in time. Okay, so Kieran, I agree with everything that you said, 100%. Like, all this makes total sense, and honestly, I like it. And I like that LSS has created a new system. Again, I love that he said it's not perfect, and I agree that it's not perfect. There are definitely some issues to it. There are some issues in terms of even at the competitive level, right? But here's my thing, and I understand that maybe I am I'm gonna make myself bigger. I understand that maybe I am I'm just not the key demographic that LSS James White wants for Flesh and Blood. But if the game is going to be a more of a success than like, if the game is going to be more of a success, let's use this for example. In chess, right? At high level competitive events, you have a chess timer. But when you're playing chess with your friends, when you're playing chess, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, maybe I'm wrong, right? Like when you do play chess, I don't know, I guess if you went to a local chess tournament, they would make you play by the chess timer rules and such, then you would learn how to be a better chess player. So that's fair. But it's a little bit different because it's so much less complex too, where it's like, I want to be able to play in a skirmish event. Let's use that for an example. I want to be able to play in a skirmish event because I really believe that playing in a skirmish event for me is my best opportunity to learn the game and to experience the game and to really, I really believe that is my next step, right, in learning how to play the game, is play a little bit more competitively. But I don't feel like I am able to play maybe I am, but I don't feel like maybe like last week or 2 weeks ago, I would have been able to play and be confident in finishing a game in 30 minutes. Now that I've played quite a bit, I feel like I could get into it a little bit more. But my concern is that if LSS only focuses on their rules for the high-level tournaments, that it's going to make the accessibility of Flesh and Blood too difficult for the average person. And I'm concerned that people will have feel bad moments as a result of two things that I've seen, both in tournaments that I've been a part of and tournaments that I've helped organize and run. The two things I've seen is, on one side, the mid to high level players were frustrated by the slow play of lower level players, and then the lower level players weren't having a good time because the higher level players weren't really graceful. They weren't really super, because they were concerned about the tie, because the tie affected them so much that they lost sight of like helping the other person learn how to play this game. And in my opinion, this is a crucial time where people need to be able to learn how to play. So while I totally agree with the idea that high-level play should be the way that it is, and I think it's genius from the little that I know about high-level play, I can see, and I've talked to people, and I understand that there's a lot of manipulation with a 3-1-1 or 3-1-0 system, and that this reduces the amount of manipulation that can happen in a tournament, and that's awesome, and I totally agree. I know that there are things that can be done at a higher level tournament, like in Magic, where you're playing, like people have teams or whatever, and they will intentionally draw or intentionally lose to help the rest of their team out in some way, and I do not want to see that, and I think that's part of the problem, and I think that's part of what James White wants, is he does not want to see that happening in the high-level Flesh and Blood tournaments. And so I think at a high-level tournament, it's genius and it's perfect, and it gives me a lot of confidence in the game at a high-level area, because it's been so thought out and so intentional and so thought about. But, the big but, I like big buts and I cannot lie. The big but here is that there's another side of this game that I don't want to lose sight on, and that is the average person. The average person who wants to get on and do a skirmish event and feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, and feel like they are welcomed and encouraged to do so. And I would hate, the absolute worst thing in my mind is that a player would have a bad experience as a result of not knowing how to play the game, that would keep them from coming back to play the game again. In other words, in my opinion, the absolute worst scenario is that somebody comes into the game puts together a deck, sleeves it up, does their research, gets excited about playing it, maybe play tests a couple times with their friends or on whatever, or maybe they don't have that ability or whatever, and they get on to play in a skirmish, they get on to play in an event, they're really excited about it, they sleeve up, they play, and they get kind of ridiculed for not knowing how to play. And the opponent not, I'm not saying people are being mean or nasty or whatever, but the opponent is short because they know that there's no advantage at all for them. They know that there's no chance for them to get any points as a result of this person who is learning, so that their reaction is negative. And that in turn has a chain reaction of that new player having a bad experience. And really both players have a bad experience. Rather than the experienced player being able to encourage and help learn, understanding, hey, it's going to go to turns or whatever. And I get it. Like at a high level tournament, that's not going to happen. But we are not in North America right now. I'm sorry, but we are not at a high level tournament place. So I think what I would love to see happen is some sort of organized play. I know we have play anywhere events, right? But it's not really the same because it's just not. I would love to see some sort of organized play for people who are high level. I don't know, people who are high level to be able to play the game with people who are low level, and that's why I love skirmish. Okay, let's go back. I think skirmish was the perfect result because it didn't matter who won or who lost. I guess it mattered for the rankings. I guess that matters for the rankings, but the prize support, it didn't matter, and that's why I was so excited about it. That's why. But then it turned into this whole like people trying to get the rankings and stuff. And so I almost wish that skirmishes were just the prize support, just the randomized stuff, so that nobody was worried about the high level rankings. Because again, and let me go back to one thing, and I think this is where maybe I have a disconnect, and that's fine. I don't have to agree with everything LSS does, and I don't have to be right, and they don't have to be right. They're probably right though. He says this. Ultimately, this can come down to a question of personal preference and depends on the objectives of which the creators and developers wish to accomplish. And in my opinion, I simply have a different objective maybe than LSS, and that's okay. And it is their game, but I I really want to see as many people playing Flesh and Blood as possible. I would go from the bottom up. It seems like LSS is going from the top down, and that's great. And eventually we'll meet in the middle, and I love LSS. I love Flesh and Blood, and this is not a hill that I will die on. This is absolutely not a hill that I am going to die on. For me, what it's going to mean is I'm going to create an event in my little community that's for the new people. Like that's the solution for me. It's like I'll run Kitchen Table TCG events and say, hey, we're going to do 45-minute rounds. I think we can do that. I think technically we're allowed to do that. We're going to do a little bit longer rounds, or we're going to do less rounds, or we're going to do whatever, because I really, 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 really strongly believe that the best case scenario is more people learning how to play, getting more reps, and being excited to play the game, and not being anxious or nervous because they don't know how to play. And that's what I don't want to see, is people not stepping into a tournament, not stepping into a game because they're anxious or nervous about it. And so I think we need a little more fun tournaments. Like we need a little bit more, less of this like the high level competitive stuff. Not less of the high level competitive stuff, but some tournaments that don't focus on the high level competitive side, and that instead focus on the community side. Instead focus on the ability to teach each other. On our Kitchen Table TCG one that we did this past weekend, we had a prize. Everybody kind of PM'd me and said, I had them PM me and tell me a player in the tournament who went above and beyond to help another player play or to grow or to be better. And everybody chimed in, and we had a vote. Nobody knew about it, but we had a vote, and somebody got a cold foil a cold foil weapon as a result of just their not their play, but just the way that they impacted our little community. And that's the type of stuff that I want to see happen at a bigger scale, where people can feel comfortable hopping in if they haven't played before. And what I think of, I always go back to, I don't want to go back to Magic the Gathering, whatever. I get it. I'm not talking about the 3-1-1 thing. I always go back to the first time I played in a event in Magic the Gathering. And I didn't know what standard was. Like, I showed up to an event, and I had been playing Magic the Gathering at my college dorm room, and I went to a random Friday Night Magic with this like janky 5-color deck with tons of different stuff, and I went to this, and somebody was like, that card's not in standard, and I was like, I don't know what standard is. And instead of like instead of being upset with me, he simply said, hey, let me teach you how to do all this standard stuff. And I think at the end of the day, he got the win there, right? Like, obviously I had to concede because I didn't have the deck. I had to draw from the tournament, whatever. But the heart of it was that he was willing to teach me and to help me learn. And that's what got me to play more and more. And that was a huge, polarized example of this. This is not as polarized because, this is talking about a much smaller rule than what's legal in your deck. But that being said, like, that's the heart that I want to see for our community, is that we are inclusive of new players and helping them learn. And maybe that's not that that's not LSS's goal. I think that is one of LSS's goal. But in my opinion, they are prioritizing the high level play over the entry level play. And I'm not going to say that's a mistake. It's just not how I would focus on things. But here's the thing. And if you're still watching this video 46 minutes in, here's the thing. It doesn't matter. Like, at the end of the day, it's still going to be a success. At the end of the day, we just all need to adapt to how to play at this style and at this different level. And at the end of the day, like, for me, like, I just need to practice more. I just need to play more if I want to play at that level. And when I run into somebody who is slow, if I want to try to win an event, or if I need to find ways to gracefully say, hey, can you play a little bit faster? Can you make your decisions? And then if it's happening where it's like they are way too slow, then I call a judge over. And this is what Kieran kind of said in his article: call a judge over and they will watch. And then I think at that point they can make a judgment call as a judge. So anyway, that's my opinions on stuff. I don't want it to come across as negative towards LSS. Like, I totally understand the vision behind what they are doing, and I'm on board. My only concern is that we need something to encourage the everyday Joes who are learning how to play, and I want them to be able to hop into skirmishes without feeling the pressure of being perfect in speed-wise. So it's definitely a weird situation. I mean, I think COVID really, really hurts this because, what we are seeing here is all this stuff is happening online, right? And so you're seeing all these different high-level, new-level players in a community at, like, your local game store. You would all be growing together as a community, so the rate of play would all be the same, right? Like, you'd all be learning, and so it would be much different. Whereas now, like, you've got players who are super good playing against players who are terrible, and you'd have a little bit of that at your local game store. So it's definitely like this weird hodgepodge, and I think LSS is handling it really well, and I really appreciate the open communication that they're doing with it. I just don't want them to forget about the Joes. So anyway, I hope you have a great day. Be kind to the people around you. Kieran, great article, really well written. I think you brought up some really, really good points. I think everything that you said makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate the article. I appreciate the information, and I appreciate the heart behind what you've done. Again, I just don't want us to forget about the everyday Joes. So have a good day.